What's up, everybody? Well, at this point, I would sort of like to assert my views on astrology, because I think that it is necessary that those of us who have a real desire to understand the workings of science, the way in which it functions, make our assertions regarding astrology. And what is it exactly that you would have to buy into in order to accept the notion of astrology? I would make this argument. If you're going to acknowledge the validity of astrology, you would have to assert that there is essentially a correlation between the specific alignment of the stars and the derivation and establishment of your particular personality. Is there any potential scientific foothold in which you could essentially make this assertion? And I would argue that there isn't one. That there is no foothold for it if you are trying to make the assertion that there's a correlation between the alignment of the stars and the establishment and maintenance of your personality. So that brings up an interesting question. When we consider the notion of astrology, and in particular the notion of its potential accuracy, it appears that there are two potential stances that one might acknowledge. If we are to say that in some way or another it appears to be accurate, we can explain this in, I think, two possible ways. One way, there may very well be a connection between the alignment of the stars and the subsequent establishment of personality. Or, you see, that's way number one that I think that the astrology followers choose. The other way is this. The descriptions of astrology are couched in words that allow for the easy acknowledgement of truths and the easy dismissal of falsities. That, I think, is the more plausible explanation of the notion of astrology. Because I think when we examine astrology, we notice that the falsities themselves are actually quite apparent as long as we are willing to really hone in on them and not simply dismiss them for the purpose of honing in on the truths themselves, because there are naturally going to be particular truths that we're going to pick up on. It is the terms themselves are couched in a way so as to be vague enough in which we are capable of deriving a fashion of acknowledging the accurate terms and rejecting the terms that themselves are inaccurate. In this sense, I think that we have derived a very convincing form of pseudoscience that really has no potential base, no potential way in which it can really be confirmed in any kind of truly scientific manner. What is it exactly that you were asserting if you're saying that astrology is true? You have to be saying, there's no way around it, you have to be saying that there's a direct correlation between the alignment of the stars and the subsequent establishment of personality. I think that we asserted that earlier. Yet, in what way could you justify such an assumption? I would argue that there is no way in which to justify such an assumption. That essentially you would have to attribute the notion of astrology to a very mythological sort of way of thinking, in which we allow for the derivation of hypotheses that aren't really in any way, that aren't either refutable or truly understandable. They aren't really understandable because they don't exactly have a root in human logic. And if we are to derive a particular hypothesis, at least in terms of human logic, we have to acknowledge the fallacy inherent in the notion that there is a connection between human personality and the alignment of the stars. What kind of correlation could there honestly be? We haven't seen any reason to assume that there is any. We simply realize that we have to justify particular astrological claims so that they are in keeping with the reality. And we do so in a very mythological sort of fashion. We do so because we don't want to acknowledge that we are resorting to very mythological ideals. The truth of the matter is that perception utilizing human beings, we don't want to acknowledge that there exists a realm of the unknown. We want to accept the idea that there is a particular way in which we can grasp and explain the totality of existence. Yet the truth of the matter is that at least at this point in time, we can't really. So we have to attribute particular attributes of existence to mythological explanations, because mythological explanations carry the benefit of being able to fill in the gaps, so to speak, of being able to claim a particular level of understanding that is unclaimable by rational thinking. In other words, we have to abandon rationality and assume that there is a particular pseudo-reality on which we can rely in order to explain that which might otherwise be unexplainable. This is a fallacy in human thinking, I would argue. Because as human beings, we have to acknowledge that there are always going to be particular gaps in human thinking. There are always going to be particular gaps in rationality. And if we acknowledge these potential gaps, we realize that as human beings who might otherwise try to explain that which appears to be unexplainable, we are delving into the realm of the unknown. And we are essentially committing the fallacy of utilizing some sort of imagination-inspired hypothesis to explain that which not only doesn't necessarily need to be explained, but that which can't really be explained. We have to acknowledge, in other words, that the limitations of our rationality to explain the notion of human existence. That is my fundamental argument, and that is what I would argue. That is what I would argue why, as human beings, we choose to illustrate a fucking means of... I'm sorry, I'm going to cut this off here because I think I've talked long enough. Anyway, I appreciate everybody listening. Take care, dog. Holmes, what's up? Keep rocking the fucking shit.